Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today we're going to be doing an unboxing, first workout, and first impressions of the Reebok Legacy Lifter 3. So the moment these went live the other week, I bought a pair. They just arrived. I have yet to open this box. I went with the black and white colorway because I like more neutral / subtle colorways, and I thought this was one of the cleaner colorways that they offered. But what I'm most interested with this shoe is how it performs compared to the Legacy Lifter 2. So I liked the Legacy Lifter 2 a lot. I've competed in powerlifting with them. I regularly wear them. So I'm curious if this model will be similar to the overall stability and fit you get with that model, and how this pump tech is going to vary on the shoe. So when looking at the Legacy Lifter 3, you can see that there are a lot of similarities to the 2 with it. Essentially, the whole midsole / heel construction is the same. We have that TPU wrap back here on the boot. We have like a heavier leather construction that covers the toe box of each of these models. Now the upper is different on the Legacy Lifter 3, but the outsole is also the same on these models. So I'm really curious to see if this model is basically going to be like a Legacy Lifter 2, just with a reworked pump system and new upper, because that's what it's kind of looking like, especially when you factor in that the midfoot strap also looks the same. Now, with this Reebok Pump tech, essentially it is designed to give you a slightly more fine-tuned fit, so you can pump these shoes up to hug the foot a little bit better, give you a little bit more security. And now what I will say with this, and something I noticed when I bought these, is Reebok on your product page. You write about how this pump fit can help you get a more dialed fit for squats, and then you can adjust your fit for deadlifts. If you're watching this video and you're not a weightlifting athlete and you're not doing clean pulls, don't deadlift in your weightlifting shoes. It makes virtually no sense when it comes to mechanics there. So Reebok, can you look into that and make sure whoever's writing the copy on the product page for the Legacy Lifter 3, they understand why you wouldn't necessarily want an elevated heel for deadlifts if you're not a weightlifting specific athlete. But that's a rant for another video. But overall, these are really interesting. And so what I'm really curious in is how this pump factors in to the fit of the shoe, if it gives you more midfoot security, if it's just the tongue, or if it kind of goes throughout. Right now, it feels like it's just going to be the tongue. So essentially what I'm guessing this pump tech is going to do is you can inflate it, and then you'll basically get a slightly more snug fit regarding the tongue, and then you don't have to put as much stress into the midfoot strap to get a nice secure fit with the midfoot. When it comes to the upper, we still have leather up here on the toe box, and then it looks like we have some synthetic and textile overlays going into the midfoot of the shoe and some mesh back here towards the boot. Boot still feels pretty padded, but that being said, let's get these to the gym and start our training session. This week is a fun one, so I have a little deload week, and then we get into our big week next week. So today I believe I have some lower intensity power cleans and squats, so it should be a perfect day to test these. I also have hack squats as well, so it'll be a good day to test them on machines as well. But I will see you guys for the post-workout breakdown of the Reebok Legacy Lifter 3. So we started out today's session with 6 power clean singles at 235. The big focus of these was to get under the weight a little bit faster and get my hips behind me. 2 resources that I've really enjoyed learning from on this topic include Zach Tellender and Dylan Cooper. Shout out to the boys because they produce a lot of awesome weightlifting content on YouTube and on Instagram. We then moved into back squats. We had a 3x5 at 345, around like a 6 or 7 RPE. Honestly, these felt really good, and it's always interesting squatting with a new weightlifting shoe because the heel height is always a little bit different, but overall these moved really well. And today's always interesting because you start out with power cleans, you move into squats, and then you move into running. So while I'm squatting, I'm constantly thinking about the running coming up, and I need to kind of get out of that habit, I think, because it does take away from my presence in the moment, especially with these squats. Now, granted, the weight was lighter here, so I can kind of go on autopilot, but as my days start getting heavier, like last week when I did the 365 for 4x5, I definitely found myself having to pull my mind back into the present of my squat sets because I was thinking a little ahead of myself, thinking about the running and thinking about how tough that was going to be. And something to note with hybrid training, and something that I've been trying to learn more about as I've worked with my coach Craig, is learning more about the interference effect. So this is essentially the idea that strength training cannot progress at a very smooth rate while there is another adaptation like endurance training going on. And so 2 people that I've really loved learning from when it comes to this topic include Alec Blennis on Instagram. He just posted an awesome series on this, and Greg Knuckles has a really great article on that. But essentially, we're learning a lot more about the interference effect and that it's not as scary to necessarily progress 2 different adaptations like endurance and strength at the same time. And a lot of times we we get a little bit timid with our progressions there because we start to see one dip and we don't give ourselves necessarily a long enough runway to really start to push the envelope there. After my run, which was 6/4 miles at a speed of like 10 to 11 miles per hour and 2 half miles as a warm-up and cool down, we went into rear foot elevated split squats, which I forgot to film. And then we went into hack squats. And why I wear weightlifting shoes for hack squats on this machine is if you look at how the weight tracks and the platform, it's really awkward for my anatomy. And if I'm not wearing a heeled shoe, I actually have my heels end up coming up because it's really tough to get the range of motion that I'm after towards that end range. So I use weightlifting shoes in this context to hit the ranges of motion that I'm after. And if you find yourself in a similar situation with hack squats or leg presses in your gym, try using your weightlifting shoes or an elevated heel to actually get better positioning throughout your movement. All right, guys, welcome to the post-workout breakdown. Once again, hybrid workout 1, Jake, big 0. I am beat up from today, but 3 first impressions that I have with the Reebok Legacy Lifter 3. My first impression is that honestly, the shoe is kind of a letdown thus far. And I know I've only used them once, so it is very early to be saying that, but I was thinking more on this during my run as to why I wasn't really vibing with this shoe and its overall performance, and that's for 2 key reasons. I think number 1, hot off the Nano X3's release, that model has a similar silhouette to the Nano X2. However, the changes that have been implemented in the Nano X3 have made that shoe a much stronger performer in a more well-rounded context. So the Nano X3, despite being somewhat similar to the Nano X2, I think outperforms that model as a whole. And so then bringing us to my second point as to why I feel that way about the Legacy Lifter 3 is I feel it's similar to the Legacy Lifter 2 in the sense that it has a similar silhouette to it. There are a lot of similar features, but the changes that have been implemented in the Legacy Lifter 3, I don't think actually makes it a stronger performing shoe. So we have a reworked upper, we now have this pump system, but virtually those are the only changes I can see in this model that really differentiate it from the Legacy Lifter 2. And the Legacy Lifter 2 worked really well. And it's actually one of my favorite weightlifting shoes over the last few years when it comes to recreational lifting. So the changes in the Legacy Lifter 3, it's like, cool, but also why? Because I don't think they necessarily add to the performance. And so my first impression with this model, and to kind of piggyback off that first impression, is this pump system, right? So a lot of folks are like, oh, that pump system is sick, that is so cool. But hear me out. Essentially, all it ends up doing, and not that the Legacy Lifter 2 had security issues, is it makes the tongue a little bit more inflated, so it gives you a slightly more locked down fit, but the toe box in the Legacy Lifter 3 is actually a little bit narrower than the Legacy Lifter 2, and that's towards the end of the toe box here. So there's a little bit more taper in this model, and I think that could be because of the reworked upper construction up here. But what ends up happening, and what I was feeling, is the tongue would end up pushing my foot down, and since the toe box is pretty narrow, it almost kind of made the shoe a little bit uncomfortable, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the fine tuning of the tongue. I honestly found myself actually releasing this a couple of times during my session and just using my laces and using the strap normally versus actually using the pump system. So to add to that first impression is I don't think that the pump is necessarily a drastic improvement in this model. Plus, I'm actually concerned a little bit about the durability, at least from a long-term context, of this release system. I'm curious how long this will last and if people will get a lot of use of it or if it could break down a little bit soon because, again, if dirt gets in there or something, I'm worried that that's going to break down. And since it doesn't really improve in performance, I'm just kind of like, why? Plus with the shoe, something I noticed that I wasn't the biggest fan of is the top of the tongue here is a little bit chunky. And so when I was training, like it just kind of had some rub on the top of the foot. It didn't cause any blisters and it didn't cause any hindrance of performance, but it just gives this tongue like a beefier feel that I was very hit or miss on. Like I'm not necessarily super stoked on this big thick tongue up here and how it kind of like juts up and kind of has a little bit of rub on the top of the ankle. So not super stoked on that. And honestly, I'm kind of bummed too that the toe box is still pretty dang narrow in the shoe and honestly a little bit more narrow feeling than the Legacy Lifter 2 because I think that this shoe is going to be pretty limiting for some foot anatomies, especially wider feet. My first impression with this model is if you did like the Legacy Lifter 2 and the overall stability that you got and the overall heel height you got with that shoe, you can expect a very similar feel with this model. You have a very similar TPU heel back here and midfoot. super stable. This model also has an effective heel height of 22 millimeters. That is consistent with the Legacy Lifter II. That comes out to like 0.87 inches. So if you really resonated with that model's heel height, then you will like this shoe in the context of having a similar feel on the ground when you're training as the Legacy Lifter II. However, the upper does give it a slightly different feel regarding the overall security and the tongue, but when it comes to like the true midsole and outsole of this model, it does feel very similar to the Legacy Lifter II, which I do like, but again, with the upper changes in this model, I'm honestly not sold that you should necessarily invest in this shoe and maybe find some Legacy Lifter IIs on sale while they still have some in stock, because with this shoe, it seems like we got added features that don't necessarily add to its performance, and what we did get is an increase in $20 on the price point. So I need more sessions in this shoe before I draw more definitive conclusions on it, but thus far, I'm not super stoked on the Legacy Lifter 3. And do note, I do have enough self-awareness to realize that I think I put a lot of pressure on this shoe because I like the Legacy Lifter 2. I like the changes from the Nano X3. So I was really stoked. I'm like, damn, this is gonna be a really big year for Reebok across the board. But this shoe is kind of just meh at best out of the gate. When it comes to sizing in this model, because if you are interested in this shoe and you plan to grab some, I would say go true to size in this shoe. This model fit pretty true. Granted, the toe box is pretty snug. So I almost feel like maybe going up a half size might be a good call if you do find yourself a little bit limited in your current weightlifting shoes toe box, but I do think true to size should be a safe call for most folks. I don't want you to size up too much and then have a little bit of heel slip back here, so that's always a concern with sizing up too much in weightlifting shoes and getting too much room at the end of your toe box. So I do think true to size should be a safe call for most foot anatomies. And so that all being said, that wraps up my first impressions of the Reebok Legacy Lifter 3. I do have more testing to do in this shoe, and I hope you're not taking this as super negative because I don't necessarily want it to come off that way. I just think that I had really high hopes for this shoe, and for having an increased price point, I was hoping for a little bit more in the context of added performance versus kind of a same performance with features that are not necessarily adding to the shoe's value in my opinion. But I will have a full review up on the shoe in the very near future, so definitely stay tuned for that. And if you have additional questions on this model in the meantime, drop a comment down below and ask questions as you have them, or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.